today's EyeTalks radio episode, we chat with over 30-year revenue cycle management expert Aaron Bishop, manager at Eye Care Partners, and over 25-year medical technology veteran Kip Thino, vice president of provider partnerships at ASOA Gold strategic business partner Somacare, a holistic script-to-therapy automation platform about challenges retina practices are facing when it comes to ensuring patients get on the right treatment without administrative delay, and that practices get reimbursed for buy and bill drugs. Welcome, Kip and Aaron. How has the retina space, and specifically medical benefits, changed since you started in your roles?
I started in the retina practice that I currently work in 2011. Since then, the drugs went from 3 and up to 15 now. Back when I started, it was easy to figure out which insurance companies were going to pay and what they needed. Since then, they have realized that these new drugs are being used at a very high rate. So the payers have now implemented step therapy, prior authorizations, and as of recently, double step therapy. It's getting increasingly difficult to manage which payers want which step therapy and which prior authorizations and through where. You basically have to have a dedicated staff to do what was just an added piece to, say, like a front desk person. We now have created entire departments that just manage this process alone. We have payers that change their medical policies for these retina drugs on a quarterly basis, sometimes more often. They don't give you a lot of notice or send out any bulletin advising you of this. There are some that you actually have to go to their website and look for any kind of update. And you're at risk if you didn't do that. Back in the day, I used to have time to do that and read all of the bulletins, but as this increases, so does the workload, which means the staff did too. So we rely heavily on the manufacturer reimbursement reps for all of these different medications to keep us informed as they're informed, as any payer changes are coming up or that they're hearing. Sometimes we find out the hard way, which is by getting denials. So the more prepared we can be on the front end, obviously it's better and you have less risk for having to write something off. The payers also used to allow you to backdate a request for a prior authorization, and those days are becoming slim to none. There are a few payers that we work with that will still allow you to request a prior authorization for a date after the injection, but the major ones are holding you to the prior, as in prior authorization. So if you don't request the auth and don't have the auth in place by the date you inject, then you will end up having to write it off. The drug manufacturers do have replacement drug plans, but that is not part of what criteria that they would allow for a replacement drug. Those are reserved for patients who don't have insurance, are underinsured, or have an off-label diagnosis. Patients have the ability to enroll in copay cards through the manufacturers as well, which will help the patients with their out-of-pocket expense. So the manufacturers have a drug enrollment form that we can have the patient sign and have them process. This will enroll them in a copay assistance program, either through the drug manufacturers program if they're commercially insured, or an outside foundation if they're a Medicare covered patient. This is a great thing to have if the patient qualifies because it does help them offset the large expense of some of these drugs. But it's just another added level of work that somebody has to process and keep track of. We've also found recently, even though we have prior authorizations as well, that there are payers that will come back and say, well, yes, you had a prior authorization. Yes, the patient has coverage, but we're not going to cover it for that diagnosis. So if you do it for an off-label and you want to see if they'll pay it for off-label, and they do give you a prior authorization, it doesn't mean that they're going to pay the claim. They're starting to add these disclaimers that authorization does not guarantee payment. Like I said, that used to be just if the patient's policy was active and current, and now they're adding that in there, although they don't tell you that. So they have the right to deny a claim even though there's a prior authorization. Doing the drug enrollment forms with the manufacturers also allows the manufacturer to check benefits. Once upon a time, we used to be able to use that as proof and go back to either the manufacturer or the insurance company and state on such date you quoted these benefits and hold them accountable to that and make them actually pay. That is not happening anymore either. So it's less and less ability to have the manufacturer say, yes, I'll give you a vial to replace the one that our staff has made a mistake in the eligibility. I've now seen in bold on the bottom of forms that this is not a guarantee of benefits. They're not going to be responsible for the benefits that are quoted. So we always have somebody reviewing them, even though the benefits are verified by the manufacturer. Our staff still review them because we know our payers better and look for something that might look unusual and second guess anything and send it back through if we feel that it might not be correct and have them do it again just to make sure. So yes, the payer space is very different now than it used to be. What used to be 2 or 3 lines on a spreadsheet of prior authorizations that needed to be secured prior to injecting has now become a 2-page Excel spreadsheet with multiple columns. And as of just this month, it's getting even harder because now the same payer may also have different policies within the same policy. Their Medicare plan may have something different than their commercial plan. I found one the other day that disallows one drug for the commercial, but it's the preferred on the Medicare plan. So trying to keep track of all of that is just becoming increasingly difficult.
Jen, first of all, thank you for having us in, Aaron. That's a day in the life, right?
Yes.
And those are all points that really underscore the complexities. And I'll give a couple of details just to dovetail on that. You know, it's interesting. Legislation is going to work at a glacial pace for all of us, right? And that's just the way of the world. However, what you just outlined and a lot of these changes and complexities are actually happening what feels like light speed to the clinics and to the patients. And we can never forget the patient in these endeavors. And Somnicare was actually founded, the genesis was a piece of data from the AMA that showed that 46% of patients, the ones we're talking about, Aaron, the medical benefit, the ones that are in need of a physician-administered drug, an injection, or an infusion, as an example, showed that 46% of them, that's almost 5 out of 10, do not get on the therapy or miss their data service because of the complexities of prior authorizations. So that's one thing that's continued to change. And we see that inflection point really only getting more difficult to manage as we go forward. Another report from CAQH came out recently in a clinic. The resources or the spend on resources has gone up 30% in 2023 versus 2022, 30% cost increases just to support prior authorizations in this process. And it's only going up even further in 2024. And the last thing that I'll point out for this question and this topic is we've seen a non-trivial shift. You know, back in the day, you either called to get the prior authorization and the benefit verification, and then that migrated to forms or faxes. And yes, we're in 2024 still doing faxes in healthcare. But just in the last 2 years, that has really become an inversion where 60% were faxes and 40% were what we call electronic submissions through portals, has now inverted to around 60 to 70% portal or electronic submissions to forms versus the forms or the fax submissions. So that's a whole nother learning curve and set of challenges and obstacles that you and me and the patient and my company, as an example, all have to navigate and do this together. And that's why Technology Partners and ASOA and Aaron working with you is one way to continue to tackle this problem. So that's what I would say just out of the gate and off the cuff on the question on what's changed significantly in my tenure.
Wow. So with all of the complexity, how do you stay organized? And how do you operationalize processes, especially for large practice groups with multiple locations?
It's not easy. I work a lot of hours. The most important thing I would say, since I've done this for a while, is having to be open to change and to technology. I do have offices that are smaller that still are struggling with using and embracing technology, but usually when we show them the advantages to it, it does finally set in. There are resistant people, but it really does save a lot of time and a lot of energy and streamlines a lot of processes. We daily are still looking for that extra minute that we can carve off of something. So as Kip would say, systems is number one. Our PM system that we used in my largest office did not offer a very good tracking system for prior authorizations and or expiring prior authorizations. So we really struggled with trying to keep that accurate without having to look at every single patient every single time they came in and reading through all of that, because we didn't have the staff or time to do that. Finding a system that would help keep all of that centralized and removing as many as possible the faxing, the paper forms. We found with paper forms is it would be fine. Someone could fill it out and fax it in, but out of sight, out of mind. What do you do with it once it's faxed in? Do you have a big accordion paper file that's a tickler system? Somebody would have to create some kind of double check system to be able to figure out before the patient came in, did that come back? Did they need something added to it? Did the fax even get there? So gone are those kind of things. In my opinion, using SamaCare has really changed that. For my largest group, we had 15 offices that were responsible for doing their own prior authorizations via front desk staff. And by implementing Sama, I think over 5 years ago now, we were able to centralize it into a central billing office, and we have one dedicated person that does over 500 prior auths a month. She's phenomenal. She reads through the chart notes. She makes sure that the diagnosis code is covered. It does all of the pre-work and submits them, and then make sure that they come back. We did not have anything close to that in our PM system. The biggest perk that we still use to this day is the expiring auth. We can just go into the system, pull up an expiring auth report for auths that expire in 2 days, 2 weeks, 2 months. And we can sort it by office, by drug, by doctor, by insurance. And when it's easy as if the patient is still on that same drug, we just hit duplicate. We reattach updated chart notes and send it back. And it's just a few clicks and you've resubmitted that auth. In the past, that wasn't possible. We no longer have to fill out paper forms. We have an API where SamaCare will pull the demographic information from our system, so we don't even have to type all of that into the system to add a patient from the beginning. We've also used things like PX technology to do our drug enrollments for the manufacturers to check benefits and make sure they're eligible for some kind of copay assistance. PX technology has the ability to interface with your scheduling system. You can pull up the patient, pick the drug that the physician wants to use, have the patient sign with a stylus or their finger, and save it. It then goes into the PX technology portal where my enrollment staff will go in, answer a few questions if they weren't already auto-filled by our EHR system, and they submit it. When they submit it, it faxes to the drug manufacturer, they verify the benefits, and then they will fax back the benefits as they were determined in the normal fashion that you would have done before. Prior to that, we used to have to go in, either fill out a manual enrollment form and fax it over. I know there's still a lot of practices out there that are still doing it that way. Then we went from there to going into the actual drug manufacturer's portal and hand entering all the information to submit an electronic version of that, which did work, but now it's a lot easier. And I did have resistant staff that didn't want to change, but they have thanked me now for pushing them in that direction, because it has saved us a lot of time. It's saved us a lot of time to take on something else, because every time you turn around, there's new drugs that are coming out, new therapies, new step therapies, more things to track, changes in foundations. So it's never a dull moment. The only other thing I would suggest too is making sure that your staff know what they're responsible for as far as what these drugs do, what diagnosis codes they cover. We use the AAO Retina coding guides. I am in that book probably daily, and I've done this a long time, but there's still things that come up. So making sure that your staff have the tools that they need to be able to do their job and do it well is a big plus. I'm big on education, roundtables, people talking to each other as far as getting together on the AAO listserv, what's going on in the industry, what's wrong, what are people finding, is a huge help, because there's always something going on with these insurance companies out there, and it really helps to have somebody else going through it as well to put your heads together.
Yeah, and Aaron, you said it best. It's not easy, right?
No.
The organizational mastery part of it. And you've got a well-oiled machine, and everything you just said, I mean, that takes time and pressure. And the thing about this is it never stops, right? You get the prior authorization done. There's not a party thrown in the clinic. Now, maybe there should be, but there's not, right? And because then you've got to do the next one, the next one, the next one, and then there's reauthorization. So it's this continuum that kind of turns into a vicious cycle. And from a solution point of view, what I would say is there is no silver bullet, right? There's a lot of lead bullets. Anybody promises you a perfect world, run the other way, because we're all trying to figure this out and continuously develop technology to keep up with all of these changes. And that's what I would say. You do need a technology partner or partners. They're critical. And ASOA is an example, a technology partner, an RCM partner, that's revenue cycle, or your GPO can have solutions to help you. Somicare, it's a free cloud-based platform to help folks submit, track, manage, and organize their prior authorizations all in one place. And we think of it like a CRM. So if you think of a HubSpot or a Salesforce.com as an example, and you mentioned it, Aaron, you can't really build that on your own from a clinic perspective. And you've built a lot of great tools there. But Somicare's 7 years, we're in 7 specialties across the country and started in Retina. And it's a mountain to continuously climb. We also have built recently, as part of helping to organize all of this, premium services as well, support on the back end, eligibility checks, BVs, enrollments, and including EMR integrations and all these things to, again, make it a little bit easier for you all, and specifically for the patient to get on the right therapy at the right time. We actually call our operating system a script to therapy system. But I want to go back to the CRM, right? Because when you think of Somicare as a CRM or a technology partner, you really want that value add, because the data and informatics is a heavy bat. And Aaron, you know this better than anybody utilizing Somicare, because the data that you get, you can't really capture on your own with spreadsheets or however, Google Docs or however folks do it. But understanding that internal and external efficiencies and analytics really enable more productive conversations internally and externally, including with the payers when you're negotiating with them or speaking to them, because it gives you analytics, payer versus payer. It's a competitive market out there. And that data for you and your staff really leads to just a better path forward. And that's one of the things we continue to develop, again, to ensure that those patients get on the therapy at the right time. And that also helps with organization, because you're not falling behind as much as you would without a technology partner.
And with increasing staff needed for administrative processes, how do you retain and train employees? And can technology help with this?
Absolutely. This is a very difficult time for a workforce. Post-COVID, there's been a big switch and change in finding employees and finding good employees that want to work and want to learn. So we're thankful that we, in most offices, don't have a high turnover of staff in the RCM department anyway. But we do look for people that have some relative experience from, whether it be oncology or pharmacy, some kind of drug-related industry or prior authorizations, so they at least understand what it is that they are getting into. The drug manufacturers do provide nice leaflets of each drug that we use, all the diagnosis codes that are covered, and what coding should look like, an example of the claim form, and any kind of phone numbers for support that they would need. So we do utilize those a lot, and they are there and will offer training if you need that for your staff. We have taken, and just because I'm fortunate to have multiple offices that can learn from each other, we can share staff if we need to. We have a very consistent way of processing everything. It all starts with how your clinic is situated. You have to have a good process flow between the decision comes from the physician as to what drug he wants to use to treat the patient. So from there, what is that communication from the physician to whomever it is that's going to tell the person and responsible for prior authorizations and checking benefits and getting the patient enrolled? So making sure that you have a process that works and flows, and you go through and make sure that there aren't any hiccups or things being lost in translation, because it's a big team and it takes a village to make sure that this gets done right. But making sure that you map through the entire process, and I do it a lot, and I've tweaked it a lot. I've moved responsibilities from this person to that person, or from this area to that area. It's not just an RCM function, it's not just a clinical function, it's both. I make sure that we have kind of like an SOP of how it should flow, who is responsible. It can vary in different offices, but making sure the people that are responsible know what they're responsible for. I also explain to staff what this is and what it is. I know for years people were like, we have them sign that form for copay assistance. And I said, that form is not for copay assistance. The end result is copay assistance, possibly, but that's not what the form is for. But for years, people thought that's what it was. So I like to educate them on the whole process, what the drug does, why we do this, the whole process from start to finish. It tends to, I think, resonate a little bit more and make them understand the importance for each piece and why each person has an important part in this process. Most of our offices are on the same, are trying to be on the same systems, but they're not. We have some that are on the same PM, but not the same EMR. So I have a variety of all of it. Little challenging, but I've been able to create processes and share that with everyone, whether it's the same system or not the same system, the process is the same. We also have implemented SAMA into all of our offices and have done that across the board. That way, if somebody is out, if we have a loss of an employee, somebody else can log in and take over and assist very easily. I use a report that SamaCare does that sends me on a weekly basis. As Kip was talking about, having data is not something I can get just from my PM system as far as that information. Sama creates this report and sends it broken down by office. And I can see, it gives me really good data as far as how many auths we've done on a rolling 4-week calendar by employee. So I've used that for productivity. Yes, my largest office has one person, but I have other offices that have more. So we've used that for their process improvement, to reevaluate load from a workforce, and to tell who's being productive and who's not, to find out if there's problems or breakdowns in the process. One of the more important things that we have found by using that is SAMA will also track how fast a prior authorization is turned around. So before, it was always a guess. People can just say, oh, we need 2 weeks, you need 2 weeks. Well, we found that really wasn't true. So it's really nice that you can see how many days it actually takes on average to get an auth back by payer. So my staff have learned by that what payers are going to do it quickly, so you don't have to do them immediately as soon as you get the request, whereas ones that may take a couple weeks. We found that has been a great tool. We've also found statistics on there that will tell us which payers didn't need an auth, or the denial percentage based on no auth needed, or what my denial rate is on submission. So do I have a problem? When I have a new person, there's a spike in the denials. Well, I found out they were putting them in with the date that was like yesterday, and it was coming up as a backdated type auth, so it was not confirmed before the injection date happened. So that was glaringly obvious to me, because it all of a sudden was a huge spike. So I was able to go back to my new people and say, okay, something's wrong here. It just makes it much easier to figure out and isolate what the issues are by having just a simple report like that.
Yeah, I mean, the answer to the question, articulated masterfully, Aaron. From a clinic's operations, I can't answer it any better than that. What I can, from my lens, what I can say is, look, everybody that's in healthcare that I know, and you probably know, and yourself as well, got into healthcare for a reason, probably a personal reason, right? They didn't get into healthcare to be this frustrated, to watch the patients frustrated, to have to go through processes that cause the burnout. And what I'll say is, the payer's not the villain of the story. They're not the bad guy, right? Somacare, we consider ourselves the guide. Aaron, the clinic, you all and the patients, we consider the heroes of the story. And it's the complexities. It's that journey from start to finish that's become so convoluted. That's really the villain. And that's where Somacare stepped in. And I think the best way that I can say this is, I was at a conference not long ago, and a key opinion leader, a physician, got on the podium, was asked this question. And the doctor said, What's happening with prior authorizations is an intrusion on my healthcare to my patients. And then he paused and he said, but it's a vital checks and balances system for fraud and waste and the burden of the market fiscally in general. And I tend to agree with that. So there's two islands there. And now here, Samacare and Aaron are kind of this boat in the middle trying to find our way through it and navigate those waters. And that's where I think, as Aaron said, a technology partner can help you, especially from the operational side. If you're spending less time on these activities, if you have less frustration and less cost burden, then theoretically you should have less churn and happier employees. And then they will obviously do what they do best, which is patient care and take their clinical behavior to the next level. So that's how I'd answer the question from my lens at Samacare.
Now, with the recent passing of the Seniors Timely Access to Care Act, there has finally been some policy movement when it comes to streamlining patient access. What do you think about legislation to date and the future of prior authorization reform?
I don't think it's moving fast enough. The amount of prior authorizations that has developed over the past, few years alone is just astonishing. Like I referenced this spreadsheet that I use for all the drugs and all the payers used to be a few lines, then it was 10 lines, and now it's 2 full pages of an Excel spreadsheet. It's getting to be very difficult, timely, and expensive to manage. There has been some reform proposed, but when I read it, it's not enough. What they're asking for is timely turnaround time, everybody having an electronic form, a portal or something. And I'm like, okay, that's really not it. That's not helping. We do over 500 prior authorizations a month. If you submit everything correctly, how many of them actually still deny or question something? I mean, it's very few. They may come back saying, oh, you didn't have a date correct on this, or you needed to have another date for a chart note, et cetera. Something's usually fixable. It's not something that's critical, but if 99% of our prior authorizations we submit are approved, then who's really looking at these? Because some of them, there are payers that will adjudicate it immediately as you put it in. Some of them are same day. So you can't tell me that there's a medical staff person that's educated in retina drugs actually reading through every chart note and every prior authorization that was submitted and making sure that these were clinically appropriate. So if they're doing it anyway, it's just kind of a tactic to slow things down. What really annoys me, and it's just my personal grievance, is the payers that, even though you went through the process to do step therapy and prior authorization, they still deny it, wanting chart notes for every injection. It's just an added stall tactic, in my opinion. It's holding up our revenue. It's causing a lot of rework. The amount of staff that you used to have is a lot more than you ever did before. And it shouldn't be that way. When you look at our denial rates, it's like, why is that? You have everything checked before you service the patient, from eligibility to referrals to auths. It should go through and get paid, but it doesn't. So, just the amount of staff that you need to do that, it's getting out of hand. And it's hurting the patients, because there are a lot of times that we have to reschedule the patient or have them come back or not give them treatment today because their payer didn't come through with what it was that we needed. We do sometimes get the patients involved. There are some plans that are difficult to deal with, and it does help if you get the patient involved. But thinking of some of the conditions that we treat, these patients are elderly and they can't see. So having them get involved in this is not always optimal. It's hard enough just to get their benefits with coordination of benefits after retirement, getting that all aligned appropriately. I don't think there's enough support for seniors who are going through retirement and changing into a Medicare Advantage plan and explaining anything to them. We do that on a yearly basis when patients call and say, I'm going to change my insurance, and we aren't supposed to counsel them, but tell them that they really should contact somebody at the payer and explain it to them. We'll do that without any we'll just explain what the plan does, but we won't tell them to make a decision or involve ourselves in that. But we refer them back to the payer and say, you may want to ask these questions before you do that. But yes, the physicians are changing drugs, left and right. And sometimes every month it's making prior authorizations a crazy process to have to manage.
Yeah, I mean, Aaron, you're extremely nice about that. I'm going to take a little bit different course. Listen, legislation and the way that the government works in those cases is with the best of intentions, right? I worry because, look, if we didn't have private intervention, private solutions coming out of the public, as an example, and other orgs and entities, we'd still have an iron lung out there, right? And we don't. And there's a reason for that. Now, again, it's going to happen at a glacial pace, but it's also not a catch-all. It's not going to probably solve legislation, everything that you just said. But the good news is there's some really strong entities out there and folks lobbying for this change constantly and consistently. And we do have advocates doing this. Now, there are big gaps, though, when it comes to the Seniors Timely Access to Care Act. I mean, an example is it only applies to physician-administered drugs. This is the Part B, but only medical terms and services. Part B drugs have been a notable gap in recent CMS reforms. And the reforms only apply to Medicare and Medicaid, with the thought being that these reforms, if and when adopted, will impact how commercial plans then take those on. But there's never a guarantee to that. There never has been. I look at gold carding, right? It's that shooting the moon scenario, gold carding meaning don't require a prior authorization for certain drugs. And I think it's an interesting option. And if this is where data comes in, if you've got 3 out of 10 pairs, as an example, that are not doing what you said, Aaron, but basically they're still requesting information and yet approving it 99 to 100% of the time, why go through all that when you don't have to, or when it's already been kind of this unification with those pairs, and then the other pairs would follow suit? You see, that's where I think change can really come, is putting this information and data in front of the pairs and kind of forcing their hand in a way. Like I said, they're not the villain, but there isn't a unification with specific products across pairs and plans and centralized data. And like I said, there's still phone calls and faxes out there. We're evolving in some ways in the right direction, but to your point, Aaron, it's going too slow and in some respects in the wrong direction. So everything that you're doing, everything that Somacare and technology partners can provide, sunlight's the greatest disinfectant. And I think that data is our hammer as well, to be able to continue to put that in front of not only legislators, but the payers as well, and see if we can make that change faster, if that makes sense. That's my take on the question.
Well, Kip and Aaron, this is my final question for you both today. What life hacks or work hacks can you provide our EyeTalks radio listeners with to immediately make their day-to-day easier?
I'm not sure that easier is possible, but less stressful. I would say, one, make sure that you have tools for your staff. I highly recommend having some type of tool that is a spreadsheet or a list of which drugs, which insurance companies require what. Because that's critical. You could take the other way and say, I'm just going to submit an auth and hope for the best. That does tend to be a waste of time. So it is better if you organize a list of payers and drugs and step therapy. There are a few payers out there that actually have lists on their website, if you want to go looking for them, that actually have kind of a spreadsheet that will show diagnosis codes and drugs covered for which ones, is quite nice. But I'm a firm believer in having tools for your staff. I used to be able to keep all this straight, and it's just not possible anymore. You have to have something written down. So don't assume you just told somebody something and that they're going to remember. So tools. I also use a bundling tool for tests and photos, so we can look and see by cross-reference what is it that's bundled, so you don't waste time billing something that's not going to get paid. So use tools, payers that you take, payers that you don't take, those kind of things. Prior authorization rules, which ones backdate, which ones don't, which ones you can use a portal, which ones you have to do through the regular fax method. And then also using reference materials. So there are some websites out there, I don't particularly like them. They're okay if you're looking for something bundled from a CCI edit perspective, but I am a firm believer in the Retina coding guide, or some of the other AAO ophthalmology coding coach type books are huge. And they have a lot of good reference material in there just for people who are starting out. So I firmly believe that is huge. If you can find staff that's dedicated to their job and like to learn, it does really help. Having hired people that are engaged in their job and like what they do and care about their job, it makes a world of difference. And then I would also say embrace electronic systems. I know that not everybody is electronic or technology savvy, but learning the tools that are out there, talk to other providers who are using some of the latest and greatest technology. There are systems that save a lot of time. Like I said, PX technology is great. Using SamaCare has been awesome. So we can shave off a lot of time that we're spending doing repetitive things and not having something that's actually foolproof to help you find what you need to, get renewed, re-authed, or what a patient's on. And I also recommend getting with your drug reps, and they will supply you with tools and guides as far as what the drug does, what it covers, what it doesn't cover, and what payers are paying for what currently, especially when it's a new drug. We all know how painful that is. I am a firm believer in holding off until a permanent code is out there, just because it saves a lot of rework and a lot of follow-up on trying to get a claim paid that the payer hasn't loaded yet. So learn your payer policies. It is something you kind of have to have staff to devote time to. It's not just an add-on service anymore.
Yeah, I mean, Erin, you said tools. I mean, you could say golf clubs, right? You need several to finish the course, and you can't just play 18 holes with a driver. I get that. But I would like the hockey analogy, if you don't mind. You can play hockey without a hockey stick. You're just not going to score any goals. So to your point, use every arrow in your quiver that you can find, but you have to look for it, right? A lot of times they'll come to you, sometimes they won't, and vet them. There's a serious vetting process. And then you had mentioned even internal education, continuous training, keeping the goal focused on the patient. But when you look at technology partners and part of that vetting process, what I will advise is, look, experience matters. There is something to be said with scar tissue. It is not fun to obtain, but it's there for a reason. So what is that company's value? How long have they been around? What use cases do they have? What case studies do they have? What development pathway and roadmap do they have, and partnerships, their brand name, the data that comes with it? And that will typically steer you in the right direction. It's tough out there. Erin, you said it best today, and I really appreciate your expertise and everything you've done in ASOA. Thank you for having us on. Hopefully this helps to clarify some things and also provide some solutions and food for thought. And appreciate your time, everybody.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much to Erin Bishop from EyeCare Partners and Kip Thino from SamaCare for joining me today to discuss the changing reimbursement landscape for retina practices. I also want to thank ASOA Gold Strategic Business Partner, SamaCare, for pulling this together. Please visit samacare.com for more information. ASOA offers many resources to help members manage and improve the performance of their practices, including webinars, podcasts, the ASOA Learning Center, articles in Administrative Eye Care magazine, and the new compensation survey. Not a member of ASOA? Learn about the benefits of membership at asoa.org/membership and join today.
Thank you for listening to EyeTalks Radio, a podcast production of the American Society of Ophthalmic Administrators. Follow us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify,